When the sun disappeared behind the tall stone walls, the real mystery of medieval life began. Night was a dangerous time. People feared ghosts, witches, thieves, and strange creatures that they believed walked in the dark. But what is even more surprising, is how people slept. In the medieval night, humans followed a very unusual sleep pattern. They did not sleep like us today, with one long rest. Instead, they had two sleeps. The first sleep happened just after sunset. Homes were quiet, fires burned low, and families lay down wrapped in wool blankets. But after a few hours, like a secret rule written by nature, they woke up. Everyone. At the same time. Imagine, the whole village opening their eyes in the middle of the night. Streets dimly lit by torches. Dogs barking at something unseen. The air cold, breath visible like small clouds of fear. What did they do during this strange time? Some prayed. Some talked quietly. Some visited neighbors. Some even walked into the dark outside, risking danger. This period between first sleep and second sleep was a time of whispers. A moment where people shared secrets, made important decisions, and sometimes did things they did not want others to know. But why did this strange sleep habit exist? How did people survive nights filled with darkness, cold winters, and frightening beliefs? And what other unusual things did they do before returning to their beds for the second sleep, just before sunrise? Join us, as we step into the quiet but mysterious world of the medieval night, a world where sleep was never simple, and the darkness never truly rested. When the last light of the day began to fade behind the distant hills, the people of the medieval village moved with quiet urgency. The sun did not simply set in their world. It vanished suddenly, swallowed by the horizon as if the darkness itself had been waiting for it. Shadows stretched long and thin across the fields, crawling toward the houses made of timber and stone. In those moments, everyone felt the same instinct rising in their chest, the instinct to hurry inside, to secure themselves before the night claimed the world outside. The villagers did not waste time. As soon as the sky shifted to deep orange, mothers called their children home. Farmers gathered their tools, wiping sweat from their brows as they locked the gates of their animal pens. Merchants packed their remaining goods and rolled their carts toward the safety of home. Every person, no matter how brave they claimed to be in the daylight, felt the cold touch of fear when night approached. The medieval night was not a time for wandering or lingering outdoors. It was a place of danger, superstition, and things unseen. Inside each home, the first sound to echo was the clunk of heavy doors being closed. These doors were not like the thin ones we have today. They were thick slabs of wood, reinforced by iron nails and sturdy beams. When they shut, the sound was final, like the closing of a fortress gate. Families slid wooden bars across them, fastening them tightly, as if expecting something, or someone, to try pushing its way in. Then came the shutters. Each window, small and narrow, was covered with wooden boards from the inside. When the shutters closed, the last traces of the outside world disappeared. Whatever happened in the night would remain hidden behind those walls. Once the house was sealed, the fight against the darkness began. Medieval homes did not have bright lamps or switches to bring comfort. They relied on flame, fragile, flickering, temporary flame. Fathers lit small candles one by one. Mothers fed oil into clay lamps, watching carefully so they didn't spill a single drop. A fallen spark could start a fire that would swallow the whole home. Children watched the lights grow slowly, their faces glowing in warm orange hues, until the room felt just bright enough to keep the shadows from feeling alive. The flames danced gently on the walls, pushing back the darkness but never fully defeating it. In every corner, the shadows remained, waiting silently. With the light came the prayers. It was not simply a tradition, it was a shield, or at least people hoped it was. Everyone knew the stories, tales of spirits roaming the fields, witches wandering near the forest, demons slipping between the cracks of windows, and restless souls searching for warmth. Faith was one of the few weapons they believed could protect them. So mothers whispered blessings as they circled their hands over their children's heads. Fathers bowed their heads, murmuring words passed down for generations. Some families crossed themselves 3 times before speaking another word. Others recited long prayers taught by village priests. The younger ones didn't always understand, but they knew that the adults looked calmer after praying, and that comfort was enough. Outside, the world grew colder. A harsh wind pressed against the wooden walls, creating small moans as it slid through gaps in the structure. The houses were not perfectly sealed, and the cold would creep inside whether the people wanted it or not. Children often pressed their hands under their blankets, trying to warm their fingers as they listened to the sounds of the night. Sometimes it was the wind. Sometimes it was an animal wandering near the door. Sometimes it was nothing at all, but in the medieval imagination, even silence could be unsettling. To fight the uneasiness, the family gathered close. Night was a time where distance felt dangerous. The farther you sat from the others, the more the shadows seemed to follow you. So people huddled together near the main room where a small fire burned. The fire was the heart of the house. Its warmth, though limited, spread slowly through the space. Its light stretched far enough to remind everyone they were not alone. But it could not be kept roaring. Wood was precious, and burning too much would leave the family cold later in winter. So the fire was kept low, glowing like a sleeping creature breathing softly. Parents always made sure their children ate before the true darkness settled. A warm stomach made sleep easier, and sleep made fear fade. Bread, stew, boiled grains, or roasted vegetables were shared quickly. The room filled with the simple smell of cooked food, and this comfort helped push away the thoughts of things that lurked outside. The adults, however, rarely ate much at night. Their minds were too busy thinking about safety, about whether the animals were secure, whether the tools were stored, whether the door was locked perfectly. Responsibility was heavy in the medieval world, especially at night. After the meal, the family spoke quietly. Loud voices felt wrong at night, they felt like an invitation to attract attention from beyond the walls. So conversations were whispered. Parents told their children stories, stories with morals, stories that warned them about wandering after sunset, stories about bravery, and stories about things that had happened long ago. Not all of them were frightening, but some were, because fear was a teacher in that era. Children needed to understand why the night was to be respected. As the fire dimmed further, the room grew chillier. Mothers wrapped their children in wool blankets. Fathers set extra furs near the sleeping area. Straw bedding rustled softly as everyone shifted, preparing their makeshift beds. Medieval homes did not have separate bedrooms for each family member. Almost everyone slept in the same large room, close enough to feel each other's movements. They believed that being together brought protection, safety in numbers, warmth in numbers, strength in numbers. The house grew quieter. Outside, the wind grew louder. Through the shutter cracks, faint moonlight sometimes slipped inside, casting pale beams across the floor. But even the moonlight felt cold, distant, lonely. People lowered themselves onto their straw beds carefully, trying not to stir too much dust. Straw bedding was not soft. It rustled, poked, and smelled of the fields. But it was what they had, and after a long day of hard labor, even uncomfortable rest felt like a gift. Lying there, families often listened to each other breathe. Parents checked on their children, making sure they were warm enough, making sure their blankets didn't slide off. People shared the space with quiet respect, knowing everyone needed rest for the next day's work. Yet, even as they settled, no one fell asleep instantly. Fear always made the first moments of night feel longer. Every sound outside made them pause. A snapping twig. A distant howl. The flap of wings. A thump too close to the home's wall. The world outside was alive, and they knew it. Sometimes, the village dogs barked suddenly, their voices sharp and frightened. People froze when this happened. They wondered what the dogs sensed, a thief hiding in the dark, a wolf passing through the fields, or something more sinister. In those moments, the candle flames wavered as if reacting to the tension. Children clung to their parents. Parents exchanged worried glances. But eventually, the barking would fade, either because the danger had passed or because the dogs grew tired. To calm themselves, adults often whispered another quick prayer. Some kept iron objects near their beds, a hammer, a horseshoe, a nail. Iron was believed to ward off spirits. Its presence helped people relax enough to close their eyes. And slowly, one by one, the breathing in the room deepened. Sleep approached, not with comfort but with exhaustion. But even then, sleep did not come peacefully. It came cautiously, like dipping a foot into cold water. People drifted in and out, listening to the quiet, making sure nothing seemed unusual. Over time, the heaviness of the day pressed down on them, and their eyes surrendered. Children fell asleep first, curled against their parents. Mothers followed. Fathers often stayed awake a little longer, staring at the fading fire until its glow blurred into darkness. And when finally everyone drifted into slumber, the village became silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that feels thick, heavy, almost unnatural. The kind that makes the heart beat louder simply because there is nothing else to hear. This was the true beginning of medieval night, a world where fear lingered like a presence just outside the door. But even as the family slept, unease never disappeared entirely. In every home, someone slept lightly, ready to wake at the slightest noise. And sometimes, in the middle of that uneasy stillness, a candle flickered unexpectedly, or a draft slipped under the door, or the fire made a soft pop. These tiny sounds reminded everyone, even in their dreams, that the night was not a friend. The people of this era did not fall into restful sleep the way we do. Their slumber came slowly, cautiously, as if fear itself lay beside them. The darkness outside was vast, cold, and mysterious. Though their homes were sealed, though their prayers were said, though their families were close, something in their hearts always whispered that night held power, power that humans could not fully understand. As the last embers of the fire glowed faintly like dying stars, the family finally surrendered to sleep. Their breaths synchronized, forming a soft rhythm in the darkness. The room settled. The wind quieted. Even the shadows seemed to stop moving. But the night had only just begun, and for the people of the medieval world, sleep never came without fear. It crept gently, cautiously, as if the darkness allowed it. And while their eyes closed at last, their hearts remained half alert, knowing that the night still held many secrets they might not want to see. And so, surrounded by whispers, shadows, and cold air pressing against the walls, the medieval family drifted into their first sleep, never knowing what the night might bring, never certain what waited outside their wooden door, and never fully comforted by the fragile glow of dying fire. Night had only just started, but sleep came slowly in fear. The first sleep of the medieval night did not come like a deep, peaceful wave. It came in pieces, slowly, pulling each person down one breath at a time. Inside the small home, the fire in the corner glowed faintly, casting a soft orange light over the straw beds that lay scattered across the floor. These beds were simple things, bundles of straw tied together with rope, covered by cloth or old blankets, meant only to soften the hardness of the ground. They rustled whenever someone shifted, releasing a light smell of dry grass. It wasn't comfort in the way we understand it today, but for the people of that time, it was enough. After hours of labor, even the roughest bedding felt like a welcomed rest. Families settled close to each other, arranging themselves in a way that made the most sense. Children usually slept in the middle, tucked safely between parents or older siblings. Their small bodies needed warmth more than anyone else's, and the heat shared from being close kept them safe through cold nights. Babies were held tightly in their mother's arms or placed in small wooden cradles nearby, wrapped in layers of cloth and wool. The newborns were especially fragile in the medieval world, and mothers often slept lightly, waking at even the slightest movement or sound. The adults lay around the children, placing themselves like a protective barrier. Married couples often slept beside each other, though not always touching. The cold might force them closer, but personal space was a luxury few truly had. There were no separate rooms, no privacy, no thick walls to divide one person's rest from another's. Night was a shared experience, and sleep was a communal act. Above them, the roof creaked softly as the cold tightened the beams. Outside, the wind brushed against the wooden walls, whispering like a distant voice trying to find a way in. Yet inside, the warmth of bodies, blankets, and fire created a small world of safety, or at least the illusion of it. As their eyes closed, people began to drift into dreams. To the medieval mind, dreams were not meaningless stories created by the mind. They were messages, warnings, or visions delivered by God, angels, or sometimes darker forces. Every dream meant something. Every symbol carried weight. A peaceful dream of walking through a field could bring comfort. A dream of darkness or a strange shadow could leave someone shaken for days. Some of the children murmured softly in their sleep. Their parents listened without moving, waiting to see if the murmurs grew into cries. Often they didn't. Children dreamed freely and deeply, their imaginations creating entire worlds as their small chests rose and fell in the dimly lit room. The fire's glow dimmed little by little, turning from orange to soft red as the wood turned to embers. Shadows lengthened across the walls, moving when someone shifted in their bed. The night was settling deeper and deeper into its silence, wrapping itself around the village like a thick, heavy blanket. Within the home, the air grew cooler. The warmth of the fire didn't reach the farthest corners. Breath rose in faint puffs as the people slept, their bodies relaxed after long days filled with work, worry, and labor. A faint scent of wool, straw, and old wood filled the room. The sounds of small movements, a cough, a shifting blanket, a soft sigh, blended with the steady breathing of those drifting into their first true rest. Outside, the world was far from peaceful. Dogs barked from time to time, warning unseen wanderers or reacting to noises too faint for human ears. Occasionally, an owl hooted from a distant treetop. Sometimes, the wind would push against the shutters, causing them to rattle. Anyone who remained half awake might open their eyes and listen, making sure it wasn't something worse. But eventually, even the lightest sleepers fell into the rhythm of first sleep. This first sleep lasted only a few hours, perhaps 3, sometimes 4, yet it felt longer because the body dropped deeply into rest. The kind of rest where consciousness loosened its grip and the mind floated into dreams. People didn't know why they slept this way, they simply accepted it as the pattern of life. When darkness took the world, the first sleep began. It was as natural as breathing. During this first sleep, nightmares were common. The darkness outside seemed to seep into the subconscious. Some people dreamed of wandering spirits calling their names. Others dreamed of losing their way in a forest. Children might dream of something chasing them. Mothers dreamed of their families in danger. Fathers dreamed of storms, failing crops, or looming threats. Every dream felt real. Every dream held meaning. By morning, many would try to interpret what they had seen, seeking answers from priests or elders. Yet sleep continued despite fearful dreams. The body needed rest. The mind needed pause. And so the medieval villagers slept through the flickering candlelight, through the sound of the house creaking, through the quiet hum of night. Hours passed. The fire became smaller. A thin line of smoke rose up the chimney. The last piece of wood crackled, then fell apart in a faint shower of sparks. The candle near the door had burned nearly to its base, its light trembling more than shining. And slowly, without warning, the first sleep began to loosen its hold. It always happened around the same time, the hour when night was deepest, when the world was quietest, when even the animals outside seemed to slow their movements. Something inside the human body shifted. A natural timer, ancient and unspoken, stirred people from their slumber. One by one, the villagers' eyes opened. There was never a loud sound that woke them. No alarm, no call, no sudden danger. It was simply the way nights worked. A soft awakening, as though a gentle hand had brushed against each sleeping person's shoulder. Children blinked first, confused but calm. Adults stretched their stiff limbs, rubbing their eyes against the cold air. The room was darker now. The fire had burned low, barely glowing. The air was colder, sharper. The silence was deeper, almost too deep. People could hear their own breathing. They could hear the faint movements of others waking. No one spoke right away. Voices felt too loud for the moment. For a few long seconds, everyone lay still, adjusting to the half-light and the eerie quiet that filled the room. Their bodies were awake, but their minds were still drifting between dream and reality. Mothers checked on their children, placing a hand on their foreheads or pulling blankets up to their chins. Fathers listened to the sounds of the house, making sure nothing felt out of place. The darkness felt heavier now, not threatening, but powerful, like a presence that filled every inch of space the firelight could not reach. And then, almost naturally, people began to rise from their beds. There was no fear in this waking. It was familiar. Expected. A part of nightly life. Something their bodies knew better than their minds did. Children whispered to one another. Adults stretched their arms, perhaps scratched their beards or rubbed their shoulders where the cold had stiffened their muscles. Someone might add a small piece of wood to the fire, not to brighten the room fully, but to keep it alive. The embers responded slowly, glowing a bit brighter but still dim. This in-between time, this strange pause between first sleep and second sleep, had begun. The villagers didn't speak loudly. They didn't move with energy or excitement. Their actions were calm, deliberate, almost ritualistic. They knew the next hour or two would pass quietly, as it always did. Some adults prayed softly. Their whispers floated around the room like secret wishes. Others reflected on their dreams, trying to understand what they meant. A few sat near the fire, warming their hands while staring into the embers. Children might nestle beside their parents, asking questions in hushed tones or listening to soft stories told to keep their minds calm. But before any of this truly unfolded, the moment of waking, the simple act of rising from first sleep, always held a strange feeling. A mix of calm and unease. Peace and alertness. It was as though the soul had returned from a long journey and needed time to settle back inside the body. And so the medieval villagers sat in the dim glow of the dying fire, fully awake though the night was far from over. Their first sleep had ended. Morning was nowhere close. The darkness outside still ruled the world. Yet something inside them stirred with awareness, as though the night itself had shaken them gently from rest, not to frighten them, but to remind them that even sleep had its mysteries. And as they gathered in the quiet hours of midnight, each breath visible in the cold air, they knew that their night was only halfway through. Their eyes had opened, but it was not morning. The strange habit of waking in the middle of the night did not feel strange to medieval people at all. It was as natural to them as the rising and setting of the sun. When the first sleep released its hold, they did not question it. They simply accepted it, rising from their straw beds as though someone had softly called their names. In the dim glow of the fading fire, eyes blinked open, bodies stretched quietly, and minds drifted into wakefulness. This was the watch, a time suspended between darkness and dawn, between dreams and reality, between one sleep and another. No one lit bright lamps. No one shook others awake. They didn't need to. Every person felt the shift inside them, the silent signal that pulled them from rest. The room remained dim, lit only by embers that glowed like tiny stars scattered across a field of ash. Shadows danced on the walls in uneven shapes, sometimes forming patterns that looked like figures moving. Children glanced at them nervously at first, then relaxed when they recognized the familiar silhouettes of family members sitting up. The cold was sharper now, biting through the blankets and the layers of wool clothing. People rubbed their arms or tucked their hands inside their sleeves, huddling near the fire. Someone always rose to stir the embers, pushing them together gently with a metal poker or a long stick. Sparks jumped and fizzled, creating a faint shower of orange. The new warmth spread slowly, offering a bit of comfort in the chill. But even with the increased warmth, no one tried to fully brighten the space. Too much light felt unnecessary, almost wrong. Night held its own rules, and during the watch, people moved quietly, living in the soft half-darkness as if the world itself was asleep and they were its hidden observers. Some sat silently, lost in thought. The mind was clearer during this time, neither clouded by sleep nor distracted by daytime responsibilities. Problems from the previous day resurfaced, worries about next season's harvest, the health of a sick child, the fear of an unpaid tax, the memory of a harsh word exchanged. In the stillness, such thoughts settled heavily on the heart. Some found the silence comforting, allowing them space to think. Others found it unsettling, like staring too long into a deep well. Prayers were common. Soft, quiet, heartfelt prayers that floated like warm breath in the cold air. Some prayed for safety from the unknown dangers outside, wolves, wandering criminals, or spirits believed to roam the darkness. Others prayed for guidance, for forgiveness, or for strength. The medieval world was full of uncertainty, and the watch gave people time to speak to the divine, to feel closer to something greater than themselves. A father might sit cross-legged near the fire, holding a religious book if he was fortunate enough to own one. Though most villagers couldn't read, those who could sometimes read passages aloud in a whisper, letting the ancient words settle into the room like a protective charm. Mothers listened while keeping their children close, gently stroking their hair or adjusting their blankets. The children, though awake, often stayed quiet, sensing the solemnity of the hour. But not all used this time for prayer or reflection. Some spoke softly to one another, sharing stories or discussing plans for the coming days. Quiet laughter occasionally filled the room, though it was rare. The stillness of the night made loud joy feel out of place. Instead, there was a gentler happiness, a closeness that came from sharing such unusual hours with family. A few individuals, usually men, rose and put on their shoes or boots. They wrapped thick cloaks around their shoulders and prepared to step outside. Even in deep night, there were tasks to attend to. Animals in the barn might need checking. The cold could cause trouble, frozen water troughs, restless livestock, or predators creeping too close. Men lifted the bar from the door slowly, cautiously, to avoid waking neighbors or alerting anything outside. When the door opened, a wave of freezing air rushed in, and a fine mist of their breath drifted into the night like small ghosts escaping their mouths. Outside, the world was different. The sky was vast and star-filled, with the moon hanging like a silver shield overhead. The snow-covered ground, if it was winter, reflected the moonlight, making everything appear blue and faintly glowing. In warmer seasons, the earth smelled of dew and damp soil. The air was still, and the only sounds were distant animal calls or the wind brushing through nearby trees. Men walked quietly to their barns or coops, lanterns swaying gently in their hands. Their footsteps crunched through frost or flattened grass. Sometimes they spotted wolves lurking near the forest edge, glowing eyes watching from a distance. Other nights, they encountered nothing more than the silent beauty of the sleeping village. But there was always the possibility of danger, so each step was careful, each movement deliberate. Back inside the house, time moved differently. The watch was slow, stretching across the night like a thin thread. People didn't feel sleepy, yet they weren't fully awake either. It was a strange in-between state, peaceful but alert, restful but aware. Neighbors sometimes visited one another during this hour. In some villages, it was acceptable to knock softly on a friend's door, knowing they were likely awake too. A warm drink might be shared, or simple conversation exchanged. These visits had a secretive but comforting feeling, as though the night encouraged honesty more than the daylight did. People confessed worries they never spoke of during the day. They asked for advice. They forged quiet bonds that strengthened the community. Walking outside at this hour was both strange and haunting. The streets were barely visible, lit only by faint torchlight or the moon. The houses sat silently in rows, like sleeping giants guarding their inhabitants. Every sound carried farther in the cold. A single footstep echoed. A whispered conversation drifted. Dogs sometimes raised their heads, ears twitching, sensing movement. Even the guards, who patrolled the village, moved slowly, their torches casting long, wobbly shadows on the ground. Inside, some families used the watch to spend time together in ways daylight never allowed. A father might carve wood near the fire, shaping tools or toys. A mother might mend torn clothing, the needle glinting briefly each time it caught the light from the embers. Older children sometimes listened to quiet stories about their ancestors, learning lessons through tales that had been told for generations. There was something intimate, almost sacred, about these hours. The world felt smaller, more delicate. Time seemed to breathe slowly. Each moment stretched out, unhurried, inviting people to reflect, to whisper, to simply exist without rushing. Yet beneath all the quiet calm, there was always a thin thread of tension. People were awake, yes, but the night outside was vast and unpredictable. Everyone knew that danger lurked beyond the walls. That knowledge sat in the back of their minds, shaping their movements, softening their voices, tightening their hearts. The watch was peaceful but edged with caution. Calm but alert. Restful but never careless. Dreams from the first sleep lingered in their thoughts. Someone might recall a dream of running across a field. Another might remember seeing an old friend. Others dreamt of strange figures or unsettling symbols. Some dreams were so vivid that people whispered about them during the watch, seeking meaning in the images. A dream of water might signal good fortune. A dream of fire could mean danger. A dream of someone calling your name might warn of illness or misfortune. The interpretations varied, but they always mattered. The fire, though small, continued to burn. Someone occasionally stood to stir it, adding a handful of twigs or a small log. The flames responded gently, rising for a few moments before settling back again. The warmth offered a sense of security, even though the house remained cold. Slowly, the minutes passed. The watch was not measured by clocks, there were none. It was felt in the body, sensed in the quiet shift of the night. People knew when the time had come. They felt the first hints of sleep returning. Their eyelids grew heavier. Their breathing slowed. Conversations paused naturally. The firelight shimmered softly against the walls. The watch was coming to its end. One by one, people began settling back into their beds. Mothers gently guided their children, covering them with blankets. Fathers stretched once more before lying down. Some whispered a final prayer, asking for protection during the second sleep. Others simply closed their eyes, trusting the night to remain calm. The body welcomed the return to rest. This next sleep was softer, smoother, less troubled by fear. It drifted in like a quiet tide, washing over each person until consciousness faded again. The fire's glow dimmed even more, turning the room into a warm blur. The last whispered breath of a waking person melted into silence. The watch, with all its mystery and quiet rituals, had ended. The night had not finished its journey, but the villagers were ready to surrender once more to the world of dreams. The darkness outside remained deep and cold, but inside the home, warmth and family held strong. The village settled again. The embers glowed faintly. The cold pressed against the walls. The shadows rested in their corners. And in that fragile, silent moment, as the medieval world slipped into its second sleep, one question lingered quietly in the air: why did people visit neighbors at midnight? Why did they leave the safety of their homes? What danger waited just beyond the door? The answers were hidden in the dark, waiting to be discovered as the night continued its slow, mysterious watch. The night outside was a world of its own, a silent kingdom ruled by shadows and fear. When the villagers slipped back into the stillness of midnight, even their breath felt louder. The wooden walls of their homes, thin and imperfect, could not keep every sound out. Sometimes the night seemed to whisper against them, brushing its cold fingers across the doors and shutters. People tried to ignore it, but the darkness always had a way of reminding them it was there. Beyond the safety of the house, the streets were nearly empty. Only the village guards walked their slow routes, each holding a torch that crackled with small bursts of fire. The torches cast long, trembling shadows along the dirt paths, creating shapes that flickered and vanished with every step. The guards wore thick cloaks to keep away the cold, but even those weren't enough. The night air bit at their skin, and their breaths floated like pale smoke in front of them. Most of them walked quietly, listening for anything unusual, a sound that didn't belong, a movement that felt wrong, a whisper that carried too far. The villagers believed many things wandered at night. Some dangers were real, thieves hiding in the dark, waiting for a chance to slip into a home, hungry wolves roaming near the edges of the fields, dogs from neighboring farms chasing anything that moved. But there were also the dangers people only whispered about, witches who traveled with the wind, ghosts drifting between the houses, demons searching for a sleeping soul to trouble. These stories weren't told for entertainment. They were warnings, reminders of the world that existed beyond the safety of daylight. Because of these fears, many families kept certain objects close to their beds. Iron tools were the most common, a hammer, a horseshoe, a small iron blade. Iron was believed to carry a protective power, strong enough to repel evil that tried to creep inside a home. Some villagers placed these objects under their pillows. Others hung them above the doorway or placed them beside the fire. They didn't know if these measures truly worked, but they brought comfort, and comfort was precious during long nights. Inside the houses, the people preparing for their second sleep performed small rituals to feel safer. A mother might whisper a short blessing while covering her children. A father might check the lock on the door one last time. A candle, nearly burned to its end, might be lit again for just a few moments, offering a last bit of warmth and clarity. Every movement carried meaning, shaped by generations of belief and experience. Yet even with these precautions, fear still found a way inside. The night was unpredictable, and the silence often broke without warning. Sometimes it was only the wind pushing against the walls. Other times it was the distant howl of an animal. But occasionally, the sound came from much closer. A quiet scratch at a wooden door could freeze a family in place. The slightest tapping from outside could make every child hold their breath. People feared opening the door, even a little, in case something stood waiting on the other side. A fox searching for scraps, a neighbor returning late, or something far less comforting, the villagers never knew. They only felt the tension rise in their chests, tightening like a rope each time a strange sound echoed through the dark. The candle flickered, sometimes wildly, reacting to a draft no one could explain. Shadows shifted across the walls, stretching into long, unnatural shapes that made the mind imagine things that weren't there. Children buried their faces in blankets. Adults exchanged silent glances, each one aware of the old stories that warned of spirits traveling through cold air or dark corners. And yet, life continued. The night was full of fear, yes, but it was also familiar. People learned to live with it, to expect its unpredictability. They understood that the darkness would always test them. Some nights passed quietly, with nothing more than the soft settling of the house and the gentle moan of the wind. Other nights carried tension that hung in the air like mist. But every night required courage. Even the guards patrolling the village felt uneasy. Their torches offered only a small circle of safety, and anything beyond that circle felt like a different world. They never fully trusted the shadows. They never knew what might be hiding just out of sight. Still, they walked their rounds, because someone had to. In a world where fear shaped every choice, bravery was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to move through it. Inside the home, as the family settled again, a final wave of quiet crept in. The fire dimmed to its weakest glow. The last candle fluttered, then steadied. Children nestled closer to their parents. The cold pressed in, but the warmth of bodies pushed it back. The walls creaked one more time as the wind brushed against them. And just before they drifted into their second sleep, the sound came again, a faint scratching at the wooden door, soft but distinct. Every person in the room froze. Their hearts quickened. The candle's flame swayed sharply, throwing strange patterns across the floor. The night held its breath. Something was out there. And the darkness whispered without words, reminding them that the night belonged to more than just the living. The scratching at the door did not stop. At first it came softly, like a curious fingertip tracing the grain of the wood. Then it paused, letting the quiet stretch thin and fragile across the room. The family stayed frozen under their blankets, using stillness as a shield. No one dared to breathe too deeply. No one dared to whisper. Even the smallest movement felt like it might call attention from whatever waited outside. The second scratching was longer, dragging slightly, as if something with weight had pressed against the door. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In the dead hush of night, every sound felt amplified, filling the house in a way that tightened throats and pulled the skin taut along the arms. The father's eyes shifted toward the entrance, the dim glow of the dying fire reflecting on their surface like tiny embers of worry. The mother held her children close, her hands trembling just enough that she pulled them closer to hide the shake. Some part of them hoped it was an animal. A fox. A stray dog. Even a wolf at the door would have brought more comfort than their imagination. But the rhythm of the scratching felt too deliberate, too aware. It wasn't the frantic scraping of a desperate creature. It was slow, measured, and patient, like someone reminding them they were not alone in the night. Outside, the wind moved around the house with a low groan, brushing cold air across the walls. The guards were far on the other side of the village now, their torches like tiny sparks in the distance. No help would arrive quickly. The family knew that if something dark truly stood at their doorway, they had only themselves and their faith to rely on. The father quietly rose from his place on the floor, each joint stiff from the interrupted sleep. He moved cautiously, bringing his weight down with care so the wooden planks beneath him wouldn't creak too loudly. He moved slowly. The candle near the wall flickered as he passed, its dim flame bending as though it, too, tried to shrink away from the door. The fire in the hearth glowed only faintly now, its warmth barely reaching the far end of the room. Shadows clung to every corner, stretching long and crooked as the man approached. The scratching stopped. He froze mid-step. The silence became so sharp it felt like a blade laid against the ear. He didn't dare move. His breath hovered in his chest, tight and shallow. Behind him, the family held the same stillness. Even the wind seemed to rest. He waited. Nothing. A minute passed. Then another. Then several more, each one slower than the last. The night thickened around them, cold and heavy. Finally, when he felt sure that whatever had scratched at the door was gone, he exhaled very quietly. But before he could take another step back toward his family, a sound shattered the stillness. Knock. Not a scratch. Not a tap. A knock, soft, but unmistakably human. The mother covered her mouth. One of the children whimpered, and she pulled them tight. The man's grip tightened around the iron blade, his palms suddenly slick with sweat. The knock came again, this time a little firmer, but still gentle enough to suggest that whoever, or whatever, stood outside did not intend to force their way in. "Who's there?" the man whispered, his voice barely audible. There was no answer. He swallowed and tried again, louder this time. "Who is at my door?" Again, silence. Only the slow rolling of the wind responded, pressing against the house like a cold breath. After several seconds, a third knock came. But this time, it sounded wrong. Too slow. Too spaced apart. A rhythmic pause between each one, almost like someone, or something, was trying to imitate the way a person knocks but didn't fully understand it. He stepped closer, stopping just a few inches from the door. He could feel the faint draft seeping in through the cracks near the floor. His heart hammered so hard he feared it might echo through the wood. The man raised the iron blade slightly, his eyes fixed on the door as though he could pierce through it with just a stare. Then a voice spoke from the other side. "Please, open." It was a whisper. A woman's whisper. Soft, fragile, trembling with cold, or fear. His body jerked, and his wife stifled a gasp. The children buried their faces in her clothing, afraid even to look toward the sound. The man hesitated. It could be a traveler in distress. People sometimes lost their way at night, especially in winters when the fog grew thick as wool. But the voice at the door carried something strange in it. It sounded familiar yet distant, as though coming from far away instead of just a few steps outside. And there was no urgency in it. No desperation. Only quiet pleading. He steadied his breath. "Who are you?" he asked. Silence again. His ears strained to catch even the slightest hint of movement outside, footsteps on snow, the shifting of fabric, breathing. But there was nothing. Just the cold night waiting. Finally, the whisper returned. "I am lost. Please, let me in." The mother shook her head, whispering urgently, "Don't open it." Her voice cracked with fear. Every old story she had ever heard, every warning passed down from her grandmother and her grandmother before that filled her mind. Spirits imitated voices. Demons begged softly instead of shouting. Witches traveled alone at night, seeking homes to enter. And sometimes they came disguised as helpless women. The man, too, remembered such tales. Stories told by firelight. Tales about creatures that could mimic the sound of loved ones, or strangers, or even children, all to tempt people into opening their doors. Once invited inside, they could not be made to leave. He felt the weight of those stories pressing hard against him now. He forced his voice to remain steady. "Where did you come from?" he asked. Again, nothing. His pulse quickened as he listened. Then, slowly, the voice returned, but this time, it sounded closer. Right against the wood. So close that the words vibrated softly through the door. "It's cold, let me warm myself, please." The mother trembled. Even the guards outside, had they been near enough, might have refused to open the door to such a voice. But the man needed certainty. He needed something more than whispers and knocks in the dark. So he asked the one question every villager learned from childhood, the question meant to reveal deceit. "What is your name?" This time, the silence dragged on. The fire cracked weakly. The candle flickered so low it nearly died. The wind brushed against the house like a long sigh. He repeated the question, louder. "Tell me who you are." A faint sound shifted outside, a slow scrape, like someone adjusting their position. Then the voice answered, but not softly, not trembling. It came in a whisper still, but the tone had changed. No longer pleading. Now it sounded almost amused. "What name would you like me to have?" The mother covered her mouth with both hands. The children huddled close, shaking. The man felt a coldness spread across his spine, colder than the winter air seeping under the door. Every instinct he had screamed the same thing. "Do not open the door." He stepped back, one careful step at a time, never breaking his gaze from the entrance. His hand tightened around the iron blade, and he held it slightly before him, ready to defend his family if the door burst open. The voice on the other side whispered again, softer, stretching out the words as though tasting them. "Let me in." Then the scratching returned, this time higher on the door, long and deliberate, like fingernails trailing slowly across the surface. It sent shivers crawling under their skin. Without warning, the scratching stopped. Silence pressed in again, thick and heavy. The man waited several long seconds. Then he stepped back farther, putting himself between the door and his family. He listened. Nothing moved outside. No breathing. No footsteps. No whisper. Slowly, minute by minute, the tension in the room loosened just a little. The candle steadied. The wind calmed. The mother allowed her arms to relax around the children. The man sank to the floor beside them, his blade still in hand, his breath shallow and shaky. For nearly an hour, they sat in silence, waiting for the slightest sound. But the night stayed empty, as if whatever had come to their door had disappeared entirely. Finally, the children, exhausted by fear, slipped into uneasy sleep. The mother rested her back against the wall, her eyes half closed but alert. And the man remained awake, watching the door. Outside, the darkness stretched into the distance. The guards continued their patrols. The wind carried faint whispers across the quiet fields. But nothing returned to the door. Not a scratch. Not a knock. Not even a breath. Yet the man knew, without any doubt, that something had stood there. Something had whispered to him. Something had waited. And the night would not forget. The darkness rarely came only once. It came in patterns. It returned in nights. And whatever stood outside his door now knew his home, knew his voice, knew his fear. It would be back. Not tonight. But soon. As generations passed, the memory of dark nights filled with strange whispers and scratching at doors slowly turned into stories that grandparents told by firelight. The world did not remain frozen in that age of deep fear. Time moved forward, and with it, the nature of the night changed. What once felt heavy, mysterious, and alive with danger gradually softened into something people no longer feared so deeply. The darkness became ordinary, predictable, and far less powerful than it had been. Yet the old habits of broken sleep, the rituals of guarding the home, and the deep instinct to wake in the middle of the night lingered for centuries before finally fading. In medieval times, the night was a living creature, full of unknown sounds, shifting shadows, and 1,000 imagined spirits. But as towns grew, as villages expanded, and as small clusters of homes became bustling communities, the night lost much of its grip on the human mind. Darkness was still darkness, of course, but people's understanding of the world broadened. The things that had terrified their ancestors began to lose their shape. They became stories, not truths. Lessons, not warnings. The fear didn't disappear overnight, but it changed its form, turning quiet and small until it was no longer a daily part of life. The scratching at doors, the whispers in the wind, and the strange knocks that might have once kept entire families awake no longer represented the same dangers once people understood more about the natural world. Wolves wandered deeper into forests as cities grew. Demons and witches, once blamed for every unexplained noise, gradually shifted into symbols of old beliefs rather than real threats. And night guards patrolling the streets were no longer rare, they became common, as cities began to value protection and order. But the biggest change, the one that slowly dissolved the entire two-sleep system, was something far simpler than fear fading. It was light. Humans have always followed light. In the earliest times, darkness meant danger, rest, and caution. Light meant safety, warmth, and life. So when lanterns, candles, and torches became cheaper and easier to produce, people finally had a way to push back against the night. Instead of retreating indoors the moment the sun vanished, they began staying awake longer. They talked, worked, read, prayed, or simply stayed up to enjoy time with family. Then came oil lamps, brighter, steadier, safer. Villages installed them along main roads. Cities lined entire streets with them. Markets started staying open after sunset. People worked in the evenings. Inns stayed active. Taverns filled with chatter. Light stretched the day, extending the hours when humans felt comfortable being awake. The night grew smaller. When people started staying awake longer into the night, their first sleep shifted. It began later. Families no longer lay down immediately after sunset. They began sleeping in one continuous stretch instead of two. Without the natural pull of complete darkness, the body stayed alert longer, no longer waking automatically after a few hours. The first sleep merged into the second, until eventually the two-sleep pattern disappeared entirely. But the change did not happen quickly. It happened slowly, over centuries, passed through generations. Grandparents with deeply rooted habits woke in the middle of the night as their bodies always had. Parents began waking less often. Children, born into homes with more light and more security, slept longer and more peacefully. Even so, the old rhythm never truly vanished. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, people still woke without knowing why. They believed something disturbed them, when in truth it was their body remembering an ancient pattern their ancestors lived by for thousands of years. Scientists searching through historical writings eventually discovered this forgotten habit and realized that segmented sleep was normal, far more normal than what people experience today. As knowledge grew, so did curiosity about sleep itself. Scholars studied dreams, patterns of rest, and the effects of darkness on the mind. They found that humans naturally lean toward two sleeps, especially when left without artificial light. Even today, if a person spends enough nights without electricity, they slowly drift back toward the old pattern, falling asleep early, waking in the middle of the night, then drifting back to rest until dawn. It wasn't insomnia. It wasn't stress. It was simply the body remembering a rhythm older than memory. Modern society, with its glowing screens, bright televisions, and streetlights glowing like stars at ground level, changed everything. People stayed awake well past sunset. Work schedules demanded long hours. School required early mornings. Factories ran through the night. Trains, trams, and carriages moved people across cities after dark. Night became just another part of the day instead of a realm filled with danger and mystery. Life became faster, busier, louder. There was no time for a gentle pause between sleeps. People needed long, uninterrupted rest to keep up with work and responsibilities. A single long sleep became the new normal. Those who woke in the middle of the night were told to go back to sleep immediately, unaware they were experiencing something perfectly natural. And as this change took hold, an entire way of living faded quietly into history. Yet the shift didn't just happen because of light or work. It also came from warmth. Homes became sturdier. Walls thicker. Roofs better sealed. Fireplaces more efficient. In earlier centuries, winter nights were hard battles to survive, cold that crept into bones, wind that slipped under doors, frost that formed on blankets. People huddled together not just for comfort, but for survival. Waking at midnight was not simply a habit but often a necessity, as someone needed to tend the fire so it wouldn't die completely. But as homes improved, people no longer feared freezing in their sleep. Fires burned longer with less